And not every journey starts with a suitcase. Some begin with a fracture in time and an echo that drags itself from childhood all the way to the edges of matter. Maybe for many, this trip doesn't mean much, just another destination, and anyone can do it, sure. But how? As a first-class tourist? Or the way I did it? Like an epic war battalion, with me at the front and my fears carrying their sadness behind, my rebellion, my imposter syndrome, my delusions of grandeur, everything good and bad embodied in 1,000 soldiers marching toward our own destruction. Because we intended to sacrifice ourselves, because the enemy was huge and powerful, because the enemy knew the black arts, because the enemy had no intention of kneeling or asking for forgiveness. The enemy was us. I could have done what everyone else does. I could have bought a discount travel package, one of those that take you around Europe like merchandise floating on a factory belt. Madrid, Paris, Geneva, Rome. Flash, click, selfie. And then, forgetfulness. The easy way. The one the algorithm rewards. But no, I wasn't born for safe routes. And if the soul has geography, mine is marked by 2 sacred coordinates: Geneva, Switzerland, and Turin, Italy. Switzerland, because there lies an underground cathedral where men dig into the invisible, searching for the heart of the cosmos. CERN, where the universe undresses, particle by particle. I wanted to see with my own eyes the cradle of the Higgs boson, the dance of quarks and the dream of unifying the inconceivable, and Italy, because he walked there. Nietzsche, my platonic love, my God without a temple. I took the train from Geneva. I had a suitcase, a notebook, and one fierce conviction. We don't travel to rest, we travel to burn. The trip first took me to Milan, a city that shines on the outside but waves its neurosis just under the skin. I stayed there a few days. I observed, I thought, I kept quiet. Then I continued to Turin, and I arrived. I opened the door of the apartment I had rented in the very heart of the city. Everything whispered to me that somewhere, in some corner, a thread of his thought still remained. I walked the streets he once stepped on. The cobblestones hurt under my feet, with the weight of history cracking beneath them. There, among the smell of bitter and sweet coffee and wet bricks, I came face to face with myself, and I got scared. What now? After fulfilling this dream, what comes next? Does everything deflate after reaching the summit? Shorin answered me from the depths of my anguish. The moment of lucidity is a hemorrhage of the soul. Yes, because everything we long for, once achieved, turns into shadow, and life, with its unbearable lightness, does not forgive stillness. So I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to create another abyss to let myself fall into. That's when I decided to write this book. About me, about the journey, about quantum physics and that impious beauty of a universe that doesn't need witnesses, and about the kind of philosophy that has split my skull open just so I could be reborn. The title would come later, but the purpose was already clear: to tell how I learned from the philosophy of the will to power, of Amor, Fati, of loving fate, of not waiting to be saved. Because God is dead because we suffocated him with questions, because we turned him into a comfort puppet just to avoid looking into the void. And Nietzsche, in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, screamed it for those brave enough to hear it. It's not blasphemy, though it might sound like it. In fact, it's a declaration of spiritual adulthood, to understand that no one is coming to save us. There is no prize, no punishment, no script, only this life and the responsibility to set it on fire. That's why I write, Because if life has no meaning, then I will write one with my fist and my fury. And if I ever fall, may it be from an excess of truth, but never from cowardice. In Turin, no one knew who I was. They didn't know my story or my past names. And as if the universe wanted to send me a sign, the course system made a mistake and changed my name. There I was, registered as Regina, and I chose not to correct it, because Regina means queen in Italian, and that small gesture opened a door I never even knew had been closed. From that moment on, every morning before entering the public library, where I was taking an intensive course on Nietzsche, I would stop by my usual cafe. The owner, an old elegant man with hands that looked like they had held centuries, would greet me with, "Buongiorno, Regina," and I would smile like someone who finally remembers who she is. In the US, they might say, "Darling," in Mexico, "Guapa," but in Italy, they called me Regina, and I started answering, "I am Regina, Regina Torino." And I said it with a voice that came from the center of my spine, each syllable sharpening my crown through an existential gesture. Because one is born female, but not born a woman. You choose to become one with the intensity of a will that crushes destiny. Nietzsche, my Nietzsche so often misunderstood, knew this. He knew that a woman was not an ornament, not a romantic ideal, and far less a mere container of tenderness. To him, woman was a cosmic force, so powerful and so deep that not even she could fully understand herself, and that terrified him. That's why some saw contempt where there was awe, and accused him of being a misogynist. But I, who have read his madness with my gut, I know he didn't hate women. What he couldn't tolerate was their domestication. What disgusted him was their habit of denying themselves, of giving themselves up out of fear, of keeping quiet just to please the man society taught them to see as their salvation, simply because he was male and supposedly above them. Nietzsche wasn't looking for women who would love him. In fact, he was looking for women who would be women in full awareness of their power, who would build themselves with the force of lightning against every parliament that dared set boundaries in the face of their urgent need to be. And I, Regina Torino, understood that this was my destiny, to embody myself without asking for permission or forgiveness, not by dominating others, but by daring to be what I already am in my most ferocious form. And in that city where the philosopher went mad embracing a horse, I came back to sanity by embracing myself. I swore I would never again allow anyone to make me doubt my vastness. In Turin, for the first time, I stopped running after myself. I let go of the anxiety of being, of proving myself, or explaining myself. That anxiety of mine, that silent collapse that happens inside while on the outside you keep functioning, is the price of being seen. Sartre said it. Hell is other people. Hell is that gaze that captures you and turns you into what the other imagines, and from that moment on, forces you to stop being yourself. When someone else's gaze lands on you, you no longer live for yourself. It becomes an obligation to fit in. You adjust your body, your words, your laughter, and you accept it. Because even though you know you are not truly free, you still seek the gaze that defines you. Because being forgotten also hurts, and so we end up trapped between judgment and invisibility. To make this more bearable, we pretend we have no choice. That's what Sartre called bad faith, lying to yourself so you can keep fitting in, becoming the role you invented just so you wouldn't be rejected, until one day, the only thing you can hear is that voice telling you, you betrayed yourself. Being hurts, because being free means responsibility. If you fail, it's your fault. If you succeed, it's yours too. That's why I prefer solitude. I don't want to carry or be carried. I don't want anyone thinking for me, and I don't want to think for anyone else. And that, to me, is true love. However, love in its most common form is a type of violence, accepted, desired, and even celebrated. And the hardest violence to recognize is the one that comes wrapped in sweet words. I do it for you. Why can't you do it for me? That's when I understood that love, as we've learned it, is in fact a soft violence. It demands that the other adapt, give in. Because anyone who asks you to change in order to stay doesn't really love you. They love a version of you they can tolerate. During this journey, I realized that every healthy relationship needs boundaries. You have to know how to say no, because where love demands submission, it stops being love and becomes colonization. In Turin, I had the chance to talk with real philosophers and scientists. I felt small and full of doubt, facing giants of thought. And yet, even while feeling strangely stupid, I dared to share my theory about a God who, if he exists, might be a programmer. If the block universe theory is true, then all my selves, the girl, the woman, the old woman who thinks she is wise, they all coexist at once, past, present, and future. Sometimes I feel like my teenage self challenges me from the past, and I, from the present, try to warn her. But she doesn't listen, and that impossible dialogue traps me in an eternal loop. Science says time isn't linear. Einstein explained it. Past, present, and future are coordinates in a single fabric. There are even quantum experiments suggesting that the future can influence the past. What if our intuitions, those strange gut feelings, are echoes from our future self? That's how I understood why I never gave up. Because deep down, I already knew. I knew I would fly, sing, paint, cross oceans. They weren't dreams. They were memories from the future. And maybe right now, my wiser self is whispering that the best is still to come. And that's what evolution is. As Darwin said, to evolve is to adapt, but it's also to dare to change, to stop being who we were in order to become what we already are. Some people never change, and they're afraid of those who do, because change is seen as a heresy against established society, against the laws of man, who doesn't have a damn clue about life. And that's what the book I'm writing is about. The suspicion that we don't really choose, that free will is an illusion carried out with the precision of a divine algorithm. A God who is not a potter, but a programmer, an architect of code who designed life as a closed system of variables, giving us the illusion of movement, the fantasy of choice, and then vanished, like an absent father who promises to come back after buying cigarettes, but never does, and in the end, leaves us with freedom the way someone leaves a knife on the table, so we can decide whether to hold it or cut ourselves with it. And this is where the concept of God is dead comes in, because I believe we need to separate God from all responsibility and personal benefit. We need to stop acting like spoiled 40-year-old children who demand that the Father fix our problems and heal the wounds we inflicted on ourselves. When we finally understand this, that's when the real weight of freedom begins. There are no guides, no coordinates, only a blank note about existence, and you decide whether to sign it or burn it. So if there is no given meaning, if everything must be created, then every step is a kind of vertigo, and no one, absolutely no one, knows what the hell we're doing here. That's why I believe the best way to honor the life that God, the Creator, the universe, or even pure luck gave us is to search for our own meaning. if only to entertain ourselves or whoever might be watching us from above like an unscripted reality show episode. That's how God left us, or the universe, or the randomness of being alive, with the terrible glory of freedom of choice and the abyss of not knowing what for. That's what my book is about, the one I began writing in Turin, Italy.